Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. In case you're new here, my name's Jennifer. As you can see, today we're in my kitchen, and even though it's January, we are actually going to be doing a food preservation project today. Now, I know this isn't really the high season for food preservation. You kind of think of that more in the summer when your garden's going crazy and you've got more produce than you know what to do with. But today we're actually going to be making raspberry jam, and we are going to be using frozen raspberries. Now, a lot of people kind of have the mindset, I think without really realizing it, and I do too sometimes, that if you're going to do food preservation, you want it to be food that you've grown. Now, of course, if you've grown lots of food, you definitely want to preserve it to make sure that none of it goes to waste. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with preserving food that you've purchased as well. So in one of my recent Azure orders, I ordered a big 5-pound box of frozen raspberry pieces with this project in mind. Now, it took me a little bit longer to get to it than I planned. You know, Christmas just went by not that long ago and we were all really busy. So I didn't get a chance to make this jam yet. So today I'm going to pull out that big bag of frozen raspberries and we are going to make jam together. So in my mind, the key to stress-free canning is to prep everything ahead of time. So here you can see I have my big stock pot with some water warming up. I've got all my jars in here that we're going to be canning in. Back here I've got my lids and some hot water. Now, guidelines have kind of changed. They don't really say that you need to boil those anymore, but I'm just going to get them in some just slightly hot water just to soften the seal around the edges a little bit. Here I have my pan where we're actually going to make the jam. I've got a potato masher. We're going to use this to crush up our berries. The recipe that we're going to be using today calls for 4 cups of sugar, so I have already pre-measured my sugar and set it to the side, so this is all ready for us as well. So I've already set up a work surface. This is where I'll be transferring my hot jam into the hot jars. We'll be measuring out our raspberries here. And when my jars of jam come out of the canner, we're going to set them right here on this towel to cool and seal. Today we're going to be making a reduced sugar jam recipe. So I have here this pectin that is specifically designed to be used with a reduced sugar recipe. So I know you guys saw this big bowl of sugar here, 4 cups of sugar. Yes, this is still actually a reduced sugar recipe. Normally, with the amount of berries that I'm planning to use, you probably use about 8 cups of sugar. This jam will still be plenty sweet. Most jams are too sweet for me, so I like to reduce the amount of sugar in them. All right, so I'm just going to go pull our raspberries out of the freezer, and then we're going to measure them up and start making our jam. All right, I am back with my big bag of frozen raspberries. As you can see, these are raspberry pieces, not whole raspberries. So this was a great price because of that, and I think it'll be perfect for jam. So the recipe that I'm using actually calls for 8 cups of raspberries. We are going to be turning this into a little bit more of a low sugar recipe, not by reducing the sugar more, but by increasing the amount of raspberries that we're going to be using. So therefore there will be more fruit to sugar. Now, I didn't want to decrease the sugar because I didn't want to run the risk of my pectin not setting. I know I'm probably also taking that same risk by increasing the amount of fruit, but in my mind it feels less risky, so we're going to go with that. We'll see how it works. So I'm not going to be incredibly precise with this, but we're just going to measure out about 12 cups of these raspberry pieces and get that into our pot over here. Now this is a 4-cup measurer. You can see the markings have kind of faded off, but the 4-cup line used to be around here. So we'll say this is 4 cups. Dump this into our pan. Now I realize that because I'm using crushed up raspberries rather than whole raspberries, these are actually compacting into a smaller space than they would normally, which means this is probably, even though I'm measuring out 12 cups of raspberries, this might really be the equivalent of 14 or 15 cups of fresh raspberries. We don't really know. So this is kind of, see, normally you don't want to experiment when you're canning, but there are certain things that you can safely change. One of those things, now I'm just going to say, don't take my word for anything because I'm not a complete canning expert. But it is my understanding that when it comes to high acid fruits, like berries that you're making a jam with, you can safely change the amount of sugar, and that will keep your recipe safe. The sugar is not actually there for preservation. The sugar is there obviously to sweeten. The sugar is there to provide body to your jam. The sugar is also there to help your pectin set. In this specific recipe, the sugar is not for preservation, so it's not really needed for safety. All right, so we've got all our raspberries in our pan over here. I'm going to go ahead and turn this pan on a low temperature just to get it started, kind of defrosting the berries. Then I'm going to go ahead and clean up over here. I want to get the rest of these raspberries back in my freezer so that they don't defrost and get ruined. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and I will be right back. All right, the rest of our berries are back in the freezer. The berries we're using for jam are heating up on the stove to kind of defrost them and start to cook them. So while we're waiting for that to happen, which could take a little bit since we're starting with frozen berries, we are going to follow the directions for preparing our pectin. So the directions on the pectin box say to remove a 1/4 cup of sugar from the sugar that we've set aside for our recipe. We're going to add that into this bowl here. And to this 1/4 cup of sugar, we are going to add this package of pectin. We're just going to go ahead and get this mixed up so that it's prepared for when it's time to use it. Okay, so it's been a few minutes. Our raspberries are pretty much defrosted. So now I'm going to go ahead and crush them up with a potato masher. You can see, even just from defrosting and heating up a little bit, they've already reduced quite a bit. But we're going to go ahead and mash them up a little bit more. This will be a pretty easy step since we're using frozen berries. They're much more liquidy than fresh berries are anyway, but we'll give them a little mash anyway. Now, I don't want to make this raspberry jam completely seedless, but I do want to reduce the amount of seeds in it. So we're going to go ahead and take about half of the raspberry pulp. We're going to strain it into this bowl here and then add it back into the pan. All right, so we're just going to scoop out about half of this or so. I'm not going to be really precise. So this is one other reason why I increased the amount of raspberries that we were using, because by removing a lot of the seeds, you're lowering your overall fruit volume, and I wanted to make sure that I still had enough to get a good quantity of jam. All right, so we've got about half of our recipes in the strainer here. I'm just going to give them a little bit of help getting through this sieve here so that you can see the liquids coming through on the other side. I just want to remove probably about half the seeds from the jam so it's not quite so seedy. All right, we got our raspberries strained. I'll show you what they look like. So you can see it's definitely not seedless, but there are significantly fewer seeds in here. You can see that also did reduce our total amount of raspberries quite a bit. Now, straining the seeds out is actually probably the most time-consuming part of this whole process. Making jam is really easy, and if you're new to canning, jam is a great place to start because it's so easy and simple, and it's delicious. So you can definitely feel free to leave the seeds in, or if you're using a fruit like strawberry that has smaller seeds, I never bother straining my strawberry seeds out. So to our pan of fruit here, we're going to add about half a teaspoon of butter. That's just going to help prevent this from foaming up too much while it cooks. We are also going to add in the sugar that we mixed with our pectin. So we have in here our whole package of pectin and a 1/4 cup of sugar. So we're just going to go ahead and mix this in and stir it in as well as we can. So once we get the sugar and pectin all mixed into our jam and it's pretty much dissolved, we're going to go ahead and turn up our heat. We want to bring this to a full rolling boil. What that means is that it's boiling so hard that even when you stir it, you can't stop the boil. So it looks like our sugar and pectin are about dissolved. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this up. All right, so take a look at this boil here. You can see that it's boiling, and when I stir it, you can see that it's still boiling. So that's a rolling boil. That means it is time to add the rest of our sugar. So we're going to dump the rest of the sugar in all at once and stir it up. Now, of course, the addition of the sugar is going to lower the overall temperature of our jam. So we're just going to stir that sugar in until it's completely dissolved. Once it's completely dissolved, we want to bring it back up to a rolling boil and let it boil for exactly 1 minute. And then it's going to be time to get our jam in our jars. And I'm definitely glad that we removed half the seeds. You can see, even with removing half the seeds, you can see there's quite a lot still in this jam. Now you can see this is at a rolling boil again. I can't stir it down, so we're going to go ahead and set our timer for 1 minute. So we're going to boil this jam for 1 minute. We're going to stir the whole time. That boiling for a minute is going to really activate the pectin, and that is what is going to allow our jam to set. So after a minute, we're going to turn this back down to low, and then we're going to ladle it into our jars. So there you can see our jam boiled hard for 1 minute. So now we're going to go ahead and ladle into our jars right away. So I'm just going to take my jars one at a time out of this canner here. We'll set it up on this towel here. All right, so I've got my canning funnel set up. We're just going to ladle the jam into the jars. We want to leave a 1/4 inch headspace. That means we want to have a 1/4 inch between the top of the jam and the top of the jar. Once you get your jar all filled, you just want to wipe the rim of your jar with a damp paper towel. because we don't want there to be any stickiness on this because that can interfere with the sealing of our jars. Once that's all wiped, I'm going to grab a lid from our pan here, center this over the jar, and add our ring. Now I've got my 8th jar here that I'm filling up. This recipe actually said that it was going to make 7 jars, but you always want to go ahead and prepare an extra jar just in case. Now, of course, your chance of making more than the recipe calls for increases if you use more fruit than the recipe calls for, like I did. But either way, I'm glad that I have this 8th jar prepared because it looks like I'm going to get a full 8 jars and then probably a little bit extra that will go in my fridge. So we are going to go ahead and sample that extra. I'll let you know how that is. All right, and it looks like my canner is a little bit overfull with water, so I'm going to scoop a little bit of this out, and then we're going to get it boiling. All right, so I've got the canner all loaded up. All our jars are in here. So now we're going to, well, we covered the canner. Now we're going to bring it up to a boil. We want to bring this up to a full boil. The jars are covered by more than 1 inch of water. You want to make sure that during the entire time that you're processing your jars, they're covered by 1 to 2 inches of water, just to make sure that they process fully. So now I'm bringing this up to a boil. Once it comes to a full boil, I'm going to let them process for 10 minutes. So our jam is all done processing. We let it boil for 10 minutes. Once it was done boiling, I took the lid off and let them sit in the canner for another 5 minutes. So now it's time to take them out and set them on this towel we have here, and we're going to let them fully cool. So this is when you find out if your jar is processed correctly and fully sealed. Over the next few minutes, we should start to hear some of those exciting little jar pinging sounds, and hopefully all of our jars seal. Now they say it can take up to 24 hours to seal. Honestly, I've never had it take that long. With jam, it usually takes a couple minutes or else it doesn't happen at all in my experience. So if you have any that don't seal, you can go ahead and just stick them in the fridge and just use them as you would any open jar over the next few days. So you're going to want to let these sit undisturbed for about 12 hours, but you want to check on them before 24 hours. That way if there's any that did not seal, you can go ahead and stick them in the fridge before they go bad. So here, let's take a look at our beautiful jars. So here's our 8 jars. So I've heard a couple of them seal already as I was pulling them out of the canner. So hopefully over the next few minutes to an hour, I'll hear the rest of them seal. So this is the little bit of extra jam that we had left after filling those 8 jars. While our jars were processing, I had this cooling off in the fridge. So while we wait for the rest of our jars to seal, let's take a little sample of this. So this definitely set up really well. Even with the additional raspberry that I used, you know, I didn't reduce the sugar, but I increased the amount of fruit, which is, you know, basically the same thing. It looks like it set up completely fine. So let's take a taste. Very good. Definitely does not need to be any sweeter. I think it's a good sweetness. Maybe even a little bit less sweet would be my personal preference, but I think this is really good. So I'm definitely happy with this. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. Thank you for making jam with me. So I hope this encourages you that even if you don't have a lot of produce coming in from your garden, or if you don't have a lot of produce coming in from your garden right now, you can still definitely preserve food. This is also a great skill to learn and practice if you want a garden in the future, but you maybe don't have one now. This is a great thing to know ahead of time so that when you start getting all that fresh produce, you're prepared and you know exactly what to do with it. It's a lot less overwhelming to learn this kind of skill bit by bit rather than all at once when you're overwhelmed with produce. So definitely go ahead and try out preserving on products from your grocery store. So go ahead and leave a comment and let me know, are you preserving any food over this winter? And if you are, let me know what you're preserving because I'm curious to hear. All right, guys, I hope you're having a great day and I can't wait to see you again soon. Bye, guys. I'll see you next time.